everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Joe Morey here, joined by Jamie and Graham, who are doing some impressive work in Massachusetts, working on this ballot initiative. Is it a ballot initiative?
It is a ballot initiative, yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, let's have you tell us about it. What's going on over there in Massachusetts?
Hi, Joe. So first of all, thank you so much for having me and Jamie on the show. So what's going on in Massachusetts is we have a ballot measure that will be on the ballot in November and on people's early ballots in October. It's question 4, and it is the limited legalization and regulation of natural psychedelics. So specifically, what this ballot measure will do, if passed, is it will establish a new regulatory agency in Massachusetts that within a 2-year implementation period will provide regulated therapeutic access to one of 5 natural psychedelics. Those substances are psilocybin, psilocin, dimethyltryptamine, better known as DMT, mescaline, and ibogaine. And the regulated access model here, as specified by the law, requires every person accessing these substances to have a screening first, so they can only access them if they do not have contraindications. And then they have to have 3 appointments, a preparation session before actually being administered one of these substances, then an administration session where they administer the substance under the supervision of a licensed professional, and then finally an integration session after that. In addition to this regulated access program, the bill also removes criminal penalties for limited personal use of these substances, including home cultivation. The idea here is to not have law enforcement waste their time prosecuting people for behavior that the research shows is typically benign, and to help them focus on serious crime. But it is very important to know that there is no retail component of this. This does not set up an industry like cannabis, and so people are not allowed to sell these substances for take-home or for retail access. So that's the basic rundown, and we're really hoping that it will pass, me and Jamie, because of our experiences as patients and as caregivers.
Very cool. Jamie, can you tell us how this is different from the Oregon and Colorado models?
Graham would probably actually be able to answer that way better than me.
I'll go really quick, and then hopefully Jamie can talk about what her personal experience and why she's so passionate about this. But the real quick rundown is Oregon does not have a personal use portion and only applies to psilocybin and psilocin. So for people listening to this, they should know that psilocybin, when ingested, converts to psilocin. So whenever I say psilocybin, I'm really referring to both psilocybin and psilocin, essentially. And both compounds are found naturally in mushrooms. So a magic mushroom will contain both psilocybin and psilocin. So Oregon's bill is only regulated access for psilocybin. And Colorado's program is essentially what we're going to have in Massachusetts if this passes. However, Colorado's program was actually less restrictive in that it allowed people who were unlicensed to charge money for services around these substances, while our measure very specifically says you cannot share these substances in association with any kind of business activity or for remuneration. So there's no loophole here. You can't be selling hugs and then give people mushrooms. That's explicitly prohibited by the measure, while Colorado's had more of a gray space there. So that's the basic differences.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I used to live in Massachusetts. My whole family is kind of through Massachusetts. I understand. Like that seems like a very Massachusetts edge to need to put on there to make it politically practical, I suppose. So I do love the inclusion of psilocin. I think psilocin isolate is really underexplored. And I think there's a lot of room for that to be really helpful for folks. Yeah, Jamie, do you want to add anything or talk about your personal experience here? What led you here?
Yeah, sorry to kick that one to Graham, but he's clearly our encyclopedia and knows that, the ins and the outs far better than me, for sure. But yeah, I can speak to what brought me here. I'm a mom of 4 kids, and My oldest, who's 21 now, has struggled with serious mental health issues for the past 8 years. Several of my kids have, but him the worst. And yeah, we just have been down the road of traditional therapy and pharmaceuticals, and nothing really helped. We eventually landed on IV ketamine, which was extremely effective, but super short-lived and just absolutely unaffordable. The only way we were able to afford it in the first place was I got my kids $30,000 in medical treatment grants from the Limelight Foundation. A couple of them have Lyme disease and an autoimmune disorder called PANS, Pediatric Acute Onset Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. So yeah, just basically we had money to spend on medical treatment and spent almost all of it on IV ketamine, and so effective. But the money ran out, and I started looking into psychedelics as an alternative. In my youth, I had really positive experiences with psilocybin, but hadn't really thought about them therapeutically. That wasn't talked about much in the mid 90s. But yeah, just as a mom, desperate to see what else there was out there to save her child, that's what sort of piqued my interest initially. I also, for my husband, we've been separated for 3 years, but together for 30 years. So since we were teenagers, he's an Iraq veteran, a combat veteran who struggles with severe PTSD that has just, under the care of the VA exclusively for the past 2 years, really spiraled out of control. And he's left our family, he's left our home, he's lost a great career, and just really has not been helped at all by the VA. In fact, it's pretty horrific what I've seen happen to him under the VA care. And I think there's a lot of good people at the VA trying to help veterans, but what they're doing is not working, and it's actually making things worse. So very motivated, personally, because of those two experiences, and never really felt connected to the veteran community because my husband was in Iraq so long ago, and I'm the most anti-war pacifist there is. Really, he is too. Like many people, he just signed up when he was very young, joined the Guard, thinking that he would be, doing weather during hurricanes, and was in boot camp September 11th and got sucked into a war that he wanted nothing to do with. So yeah, haven't really been connected to the veteran community until, things took a really bad turn for him. And I got connected with Heroic Hearts, which is a nonprofit that does psychedelic retreats overseas or in states where it's legal now, for veterans. And the Hope Project deals specifically with female veterans and veteran spouses. And I have, the last couple of years have been pretty traumatic in my family, and I have a history of childhood trauma myself. So when I saw that they did trauma retreats for veteran spouses, I put my name in the hat and went on an amazing psilocybin trauma retreat in Mexico back in March, which was life-changing. And that's made me really motivated to fight even harder than I already was, for this to be legal. The sort of the experience I had running into a wall with getting my son care and getting my husband help through traditional methods, but especially, the struggles with my adult son, and seeing all the stigma around even using cannabis as medicine for him in a state where it's been legal for so long, in Massachusetts since 2017. I would talk to other parents who had kids in a similar situation with similar medical and mental health issues. And we would all be swapping, what did you try for this? What did you try for that? And when I would say cannabis, have you tried cannabis for sleep or appetite? It was the reaction that I got was wild, after it being legal for so long. And, obviously dropping psilocybin into the conversation had even worse reactions. So, I just, I have no background in activism, but I just had gotten completely frustrated with what I saw. And I formed a grassroots advocacy group, Parents for Plant Medicine, to just start having conversations with people, about these medicines that can be so helpful for so many things. I came from a perspective of trying to help heal, my adult child, but also, the revelation that for myself and for so many other parents, these medicines can, help us heal our trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, and all these things that, we need to address so that we can be, better people raising better, better parents, raising better humans.
Yeah, it's a substantial journey. Thanks for sharing that. And I love that you got hooked up with Heroic Hearts. I've been an advocate for many years for that organization. I love that.
Yeah, I'm a ambassador for them now. And I also, with another local veteran in Massachusetts, recently formed an advocacy group there, the Veteran Alliance for Psychedelic Access. We thought it was important to have veterans and veteran families speaking for themselves on this issue rather than, being used as political pawns, as is so often the case with veterans.
Yeah, there's somebody who's been really against this whole movement in Denver with really sharp words about how veterans are being used by groups like ours. Yours and ours, to move this agenda forward. And I've shared that with a number of veterans who are pretty involved, and they were just blown away that somebody had the audacity to name that and name it in the way they did. And they're still doing it. And I, probably will direct some attention their way somewhat soon from the veteran population. I just don't think it's fair or right. And I hope to see some of that. So since we're on the veteran topic, I hope you all don't mind getting into this drama briefly, and we can do it quick. But I've been hearing from a particular activist, I guess you'd call them, from Massachusetts for years now. I was getting slanderous messages on Twitter regularly from them as Bay Staters for Natural Medicine, and I'm hearing just really cuckoo bananas stuff. And I think one of the most recent accusations is, this is a funny accusation because I would have taken the money if they gave it to me, but they're saying I got paid, Joe Moore from Psychedelics Today got paid by MAPS to do all this. It's I've received $0 ever from MAPS or any organization. And I'm just how does this work? And then years later, the drama didn't stop there. This person has a cycle of people joining, believing, and then leaving. It's kind of a really wild cycle. And it went so far as to creating a fraudulent persona for a veteran advocacy group who's against this measure. And I'm told by Jack Gorsline, the journalist out there, that they partnered up with really hardcore anti-cannabis groups, super religious groups and or alcohol groups that are just very against cannabis. And what's strange bedfellows for somebody who did make some moves around decriminalization in Massachusetts, but hardline zealot, right? No flexibility and toxicity. But is it being discussed in the veteran community that somebody's kind of made a fake veteran advocacy organization to work against this bill? Is that being discussed really?
There's definitely, select veterans that are aware of that and very upset about it. I think that news has not spread as much as I wish it would have throughout, the media to get it to people. So there's a lot of people who aren't aware. But
Yeah.
those that are aware, there's quite a lot of outrage.
Yeah.
I
Understandably
think it's
so.
worth noting that that story is what led Jamie's partner in this new endeavor, CJ LeConte, to actually reach out to her and find her. I mean, Jamie, you can speak more on that, but I think that's notable.
Yeah. CJ, who's gotten involved with the campaign, just reached out to me cold on LinkedIn after reading a quote of mine in that story that Jack had written. And it turns out he lived literally in the neighboring town. I have been really trying very hard to find veterans who wanted, because I felt like it was super important after discovering that that organization was pretty much just James Davis. And there were no veterans actually involved. Trying to find somebody else who wanted to sort of pick that up and create a real veteran-led organization. And I just hadn't been able to find anyone who was willing to, step up and do that until CJ just messaged me out of the blue. He's an Army officer who, really intimately aware of the suicide crisis. He lost fellow soldiers and friends and struggled with suicidality himself after returning from deployment, and was actually hospitalized at a VA hospital in Philadelphia. And it was the VA doctor who took him aside and whispered in his ear, you should look into psilocybin. And, he had never even used cannabis, was a super straight-laced, West Point Marine. But he credits it with saving his life. So it was great that, we were connected that way. And Graham and I were connected through Bay Staters as well. I've actually made a lot of great connections that.
Oh, you started there, your advocacy with Bay Staters. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Parents for Plant Medicine was part of the Bay Staters coalition, along with New England Veterans for Plant Medicine.
Yeah. I was in touch with a number of friends who were doing some activist work with them, and I just was like, what is happening here, guys? Why am I getting attacked? Is it because my opinion's different than theirs? And the answer is yes. And
it doesn't take much to land
and
on the
I had
wrong
this
side.
same problem with decriminalized nature generally, by the way, for what it's worth, and including their top leadership came at me super hard as well. So this seems to be something with the decriminalize only camp, which is, to me, a little bit racist, a little bit tone deaf, a little bit missing the bus on what's really possible in terms of improving the mental status of the American psyche, and which is drastically needed if we've seen how crazy everybody is lately. So this is a big deal, and thanks for sharing that.
Thank you again
Graham.
for having us on, Joe. We really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It was definitely an ugly sort of glimpse into. I felt like people would be so much better in this space, but yes, I have learned that lesson.
Tragically, I'm slow to trust and slow to be friends with folks in psychedelia because of my lived experience over the last 4 or 5 years. And I wish that wasn't the case, but it's so easy to get stuck in an ideology and not be flexible and not be friendly, and instead come in hot and heavy with the attacks. But Graham, is there anything we missed in that kind of story that you'd want to add at all?
I don't want to add anything. I
Okay.
just refer people to the public reporting by Jack Horsline and leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah. And we did
I'll
a
add that
YouTube live
it's
stream.
sort of damaged the grassroots community in Massachusetts. There have been quite a few people who have been burned by interactions with James and Bay Staters, and sort of hesitant to get involved. But we're trying to change that and trying to, sort of rebuild a vibrant grassroots community, which I think we really need in this state, because there's lots of work to do, up to November 5th and, and even beyond, especially beyond.
And rather than talk about that situation, something I would like to bring our attention to for your national and international audiences, Massachusetts, even before this ballot measure, did have a lot going on in terms of advocacy and psychedelics advocacy. So in fact, within the United States, Massachusetts is the state with the most localities that have passed deprioritization measures related to psychedelics. So what that means is these cities and towns have passed local government resolutions that say that enforcing the criminalization of limited personal use of certain natural psychedelics, including those in our measure, will be the lowest law enforcement priority. What this has effectively done is locally decriminalize these substances within 8 cities and towns in Massachusetts, starting all the way back in 2021 in 2 relatively, by Massachusetts standards, large cities. Those were my home city of Cambridge, which is right next to Boston, as well as Somerville, which is right next to Cambridge, and for those who don't know, is a fairly large city by Massachusetts standards. I think it's around 88,000 people in it. And Cambridge is a little bit over 100,000, I believe. So there's been a lot of interest in this locally in the state. And in addition to those local resolutions, there were 2 decriminalization bills, just not dealing with the regulated use model, but just removing some restrictions for personal use. Two bills filed in the legislature, one of which got a decent amount of support, not enough to pass by itself, which is one of the reasons why this measure is so important. I think Jamie had her own conversations with people in the legislature, but I certainly, as a grassroots advocate prior to joining the campaign, spoke to people in the legislature who made clear to me that without a ballot measure, nothing was going to happen, at least for the foreseeable future. Not necessarily because legislators are opposed to this, but simply politically it's too risky to burn capital on. But there were these 2 bills filed that had some support and some local support. And then there even was a regulated use bill for just psilocybin filed, I believe, at the beginning of this year or the end of last year. So Massachusetts is a place where there's been a lot of interest politically, relative to other states and places around the world. And in addition to all that, for people who aren't familiar, although probably everybody listening to this is, Massachusetts is a center of biomedical research. We have Harvard, we have Massachusetts General Hospital, we have Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. So there's a lot of excitement here, even though some of it I think is a little bit not public, among researchers for what could happen if this passes. Because it's not just about providing access, it's also about learning more about these substances within a less fear-driven environment. So me and Jamie are proponents of more research being done, and in fact, we think that this bill is going to facilitate more research and more discovery of how these things work.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. Like the fact that it makes it a little bit safer for biotech people to explore this stuff and maybe see it more up close in person, like that drives interest in investment from, large cap, small cap pharma groups. And I think there's some really good action that could happen there. I think a lot of people are really paranoid about the pharma intervention, but I'm very hopeful that we're going to just keep getting better and safer and more targeted drugs. Like this idea of like hyper-targeted psychiatry is going to be a really big deal over the next handful of years. And yeah, like how can we take a really personalized approach to medicine and do what's going to work best for this person type, first, as opposed to like, from age 1 to 90, what's the best intervention for X disease? Like, how about like 38-year-old X race, X, and background. And I think that's going to be a big deal. So love that Massachusetts is going to get this. And how are we polling? Are we doing pretty well right now?
So me and Jamie obviously can't discuss private internal polling, but there was a public poll recently that had us poll at 51% support. And and I think opposition was either in the low 30s or high 20s. A lot of people, 20-something% are undecided.
28 no or 21 no and 28 undecided.
Okay.
How is this being framed? Like question 4, is it saying question 4 regulated access, or is it saying question 4 like legalization?
Hope and healing. that's our motto.
Well, what are you asking, Joe? Are you asking what it looks like in terms of when people flip to the question on their ballot, or
Yeah.
how we're framing it?
On the ballot itself.
I'd have to check, but I believe it's limited legalization and regulation of natural psychedelics. I believe
It sounds
that's
right.
that's the top of the line summary that the book or the ballot has on it.
Cool. I like that. So, all right. And I love that it's going to look a lot like Colorado. So what, okay. So I'm not going to, unless I'm accessing through some sort of healing center, I'm not going to be able to get access from a store, right? But
Correct.
there's provisions where I might be able to grow. Is that right?
Yes. People are able to grow within a 12-foot by 12-foot space, but that has to be secured from access by persons under 21 in the home. And none of that can be sold.
What does that secure access look like? Like multiple
It's not
padlocks or
specified
key?
by law, but presumably a lock. I don't think anything without a lock would qualify as secured from access.
Cool. Yeah, nice. There's some places where you have to do like, this isn't in drugs necessarily, but 3 different locked things. So you never know. And in Massachusetts, so I had to ask. And then what about like personal possession? What does that look like? So say you grew it and you have it. Like what, can I drive to, a music venue or something with it in my pocket and then,
The
how does
measure
that work?
prohibits public use. However, possession, which includes what you could have on your person, has a limit. I think it's a molecular weight of 1 gram of psilocybin, psilocin, and then off the top of my head I'd have to check, but it's some fairly reasonable amount that you can have on your person that you could transport. However, public use is specifically prohibited in the bill, so you couldn't take it out and take it at the festival.
What does public use mean in your mind?
I think the bill specifies any place outside of a personal residence.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. And yeah, that's not ideal, but it's politically practical, right? Like, I think that's excellent. And a good provision. It's certainly far better than we have today. So
just to really jump in, for anybody listening to this who hasn't worked on a campaign like this and talked to hundreds of voters like I have, let me tell you that presumably if you're listening to this, you're pretty comfortable with psychedelics. A lot of people are not. In fact, they're the opposite. And I recently was given the privilege of talking to a group of voters, a very informed group of voters for a very, very long time, in an extended conversation format. And I was able, by bringing a very extensive fact sheet with 5 pages of citations and 8-point font, to convince them of the reality that from a public health perspective, none of these substances are particularly dangerous. You look all around the world, in the Netherlands, Jamaica, Austria. Austria is one of those obscure places that decriminalized some personal use, including cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms. You look all around the world and none of these substances, legal access to these substances hasn't been observed to harm public health. And this audience was willing to believe that, but philosophically, personally, their fear and discomfort with these substances was just at such a level that even knowing that, they weren't willing to be a yes on this, at least at the end of the night. And it was very friendly, and who knows, if you're listening to this, people who I spoke to, you know who you are. I still love you to vote for this. I really think it'll be great for Massachusetts. But if you're not comfortable, that's where you're at. This is a fairly measured bill. It's very well rooted in the evidence. For those who are listening to this who are skeptical of this, in Colorado, where a more expansive bill was passed, you look at impaired driving-related fatalities. They've fallen by 23.8% since the bill passed. The percentage of drug and alcohol-related hospitalizations related to hallucinogens is still lower than it was in 2020 and essentially remained the exact same. And by the way, everywhere in the world, these things cause very, 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 very little of a public health impact, positive or negative, actually. probably because use is so small, but that percentage of hospitalizations in Colorado related to hallucinogens is 0.27%. And that's of hospitalizations related to drugs and alcohol. So these are a very, very tiny thing. But even for people who believe that and can hear that, the fear is just, and distrust, because of all the propaganda, because of the decades of messaging that these things are going to fry people's brains, it's really, really, really strong, and it's real. And we have to meet people where they are if we're going to change policy, is the bottom line. And with the budget we have, if Elon Musk is listening to this and he wants to give us $30 million to tell everybody the truth about this, maybe that changes the game. But we don't have the budget to send educated people to everybody's homes in Massachusetts and tell them all the facts. So we're relying on, me talking to maybe 500 people over the course of the whole campaign, and Jamie talking to another couple hundred, and then these television ads that have 30 seconds of people's attention. There's really a limit to what we can accomplish, and we have to prioritize certain things in order to have the buy-in to get this done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, political practicality, like it's a big thing, and I used to resist it, but I understand to some degree that it has to happen. Is there anything around in Colorado? There is like a push near the end, right? Actually, even after it passed, this bill that we have here, and it was around like certain counties and municipalities maybe wanting to ban healing centers. Like, is there anything around that? Like, does the state's bill, if it passes, does it make it the case that municipalities and counties can say no mushrooms here?
They can't literally say no mushrooms here, and it was intentionally written so no municipality can say absolutely one of these healing psychedelic therapy centers can't operate here. However, they do get to set rules around operation. So we'll see. It's designed to let municipalities put reasonable limits and restrictions on the operation of these businesses rather than prohibit them altogether. And how that works in practice is going to be hard to say. I do think it's important for people listening, especially if they are skeptical. I don't know how many skeptical people are listening to psychedelics today, that based on what we've seen in Oregon, based on what we've seen around the world, this is not going to be a large industry. So I don't think there will be the demand to have enough of these businesses to be in every single obscure town and city across Massachusetts. I just don't think, I think a lot of the places who are scared of this, nobody's even going to consider opening up a psychedelic therapy center. I think there's only going to be a very small number. It's not, under 20 or something for the whole state of Massachusetts. I'm pulling that number out of my butt, but that's around what I think it will be. And it's not going to be like cannabis. There's not going to be big billboards up. There's no retail component to this, so it's going to be a minor industry. I think the concern about this going into communities where it's not welcome is much more theoretical than a practical concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I do always say the veteran and moms groups are two of the most important constituencies here around this. Like, Jamie, have you seen any interesting traction on the mom front in Massachusetts? Like, I'm sure microdosing is really blowing up in terms of people being interested. That's what I see here, so I assume in Massachusetts as well. But what have you been observing in terms of like interest in the bill, but like informed by kind of culture shifts?
There's a ton of interest. Absolutely. I have people reaching out to me all the time, wanting to know more, wanting to know where to source these things, just desperate for information. I actually had a doctor reach out to me recently who was trying to access psilocybin to help a patient that nothing else had helped. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interest. There's a lot of interest in the community of moms raising, kids that have serious mental health issues and autoimmune disorders like I do. And not the parents of small children, young children, obviously, but parents whose kids have been in the system, taking pharmaceuticals and doing all the traditional therapies for many, many years and not seeing a change. So yeah, there is a lot of interest, and the veteran community clearly, tons of interest there, and tons of stories of healing. We talk to people all day long and hear stories of how much these substances change lives, save lives. There's no shortage of that. It's really disappointing that the opposition is trying to come out and say that that this ballot measure is dangerous for veterans, because that's just the opposite of the truth. So that's really, really frustrating. And they're really relying on the fear tactics, because they don't have the logic, the evidence isn't there. So they're just turning to the old stigma and fear of which there's plenty. But yeah, they're playing the, what about the pets and the children, and just fear mongering, which is not surprising because they don't have much else to go on.
I just want to jump in here and clarify for everybody, this bill only removes criminal penalties and only provides legal access for people 21 plus, just to be very, very, very clear. The other thing I wanted to say is there's a huge gulf, and me and Jamie have seen this, and I'm sure others in this space have, between the amount of people who are supportive or interested in psychedelics and those who feel safe and comfortable enough to stick their neck out and be politically active. It's an immense privilege in many ways for me and Jamie to be able to do what we're doing. I have a very close friend who is very supportive, but they have a normal day job with a company everybody's heard of, and they're very frightened of what could happen to them if they were to speak up and be identified in support of this. Me and Jamie met a veteran who had a life-changing positive experience with ayahuasca in Costa Rica legally, is very much in support, but they work at a job where they could lose it and their livelihood and life could be, really imperiled were they to openly be in support, although they said among their friend network they'll speak. But so the amount of people speaking up, veterans, moms, others, professionals, healthcare workers, the people who come forward are very courageous, and they're not representative of the true amount of support for this. I mean, I'm even having to be careful because I know certain mental healthcare professionals are supportive of our measure, but because of the reality in terms of their situations, I'm supposed to not put in writing that they support us. That's just what we have to deal with because of the environment, and that's one reason why it's so important to get anything we can done over the finish line, because it makes it safe for people to come forward and say, hey, I'm a psychiatrist and I support this. Because there is a large amount of support, but it's really hard, and it's an immense privilege to be safe enough to be able to do what me and Jamie are doing.
Yeah. And I've seen that a lot in my world too, where clinicians in Colorado are now more comfortable coming forward, which is amazing. And I think that's what we'll see in Massachusetts as well. Like I know like Harvard MGH is doing a lot of really good stuff and they're pretty public. But I haven't seen it from other groups yet, right? Like I haven't seen like Dana-Farber come out or like other big Boston hospitals come out with much. Though guarantee there's people in those organizations that are interested. So how do we make it safe? And if we can knock down Boston and New York in the next couple of years, like this is a totally different game, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. For anybody listening to this, if you're in a position, again, Elon Musk or Joe Rogan or anybody listening to this who has the resources or the reach to really help us out, please do. Because this is really, if this passes, this will be a turning point for this, not just nationwide, but globally. Boston, it's a small city, and Massachusetts is a small state, but it is a central hub of the world because of Harvard, because of MIT, because of MGH, because of Dana-Farber, because of all these biotech companies and technology companies. People come through here politically. It's a very important state for the Democratic Party. So we have Kamala Harris coming through here for fundraisers. We have Barack Obama vacationing here at Martha's Vineyard. This is a place where a lot of powerful and politically influential people, and also, by the way, the military industrial complex, we have a big defense contractors here. This is just a big center of the world. So if this becomes a place where it's safe for people who are influential and powerful to see what's going on with psychedelics and see the value here, it can really, really, really have a huge lasting impact on how this all plays out nationwide. We have a really great brand in Massachusetts. If people see it works in Massachusetts, we love Colorado, we love Oregon, but it should have a much bigger impact. Similarly, geographically, in terms of the regulated use portion, we're closer to Europe. We're right by New York. We can anticipate, for people in Massachusetts curious about how this will work, I think we'll have a lot of people coming in here to access the regulated care. They'll come to Dana-Farber to treat their cancer, and if they have distress around that, they'll access the legal psilocybin treatment to help them deal with the psychological distress related to the cancer diagnosis. I think this is going to work out very uniquely well in Massachusetts if we pass this.
Yeah, I will echo, we definitely need help from, everywhere we can get it. It would be great if, like Graham said, somebody with a big voice would step up and help us get some more attention on this. We know there's a lot of celebrities and athletes, who are already, benefiting from psychedelics. So yeah, we could definitely use some help, getting the word out. Same with the veteran population, having veterans speak out now that we know that the opposition is going to try to position this as, not being safe for veterans. Heroic Hearts has done a great job of getting involved and helping us out on the ground. Really grateful to Jesse Gould. But yeah, we need help from wherever we can get it. And, I think we all know if this passes in Massachusetts, it's just going to help everyone in every state.
And something else I think I'd like to address, again, speaking to the audience here, and I think it's important. There's a lot of concerns because of what happened in Oregon and what looks like it's going to happen in Colorado about price and how accessible this is really going to be in practice. And I think there's two really important things to bring up here. First of all, I've spoken to a facilitator in Oregon. There are practical ways of bringing the price down in Oregon, and there are practical ways that we can have this be more affordable than in Oregon and Massachusetts. A lot of the rules are going to be up to the discretion of this new regulatory agency, and there is, if the right people get on that commission and on the advisory board, we can make it more affordable than Oregon. And I would encourage people who are really curious, reach out to people in Oregon, see what they say. There are definitely ways to create a more affordable system in Massachusetts, learning the lessons of Oregon. The other thing that I think is really important to point out is that when something becomes FDA approved, it doesn't necessarily mean insurance is going to cover it or that it's going to be affordable. So in Australia, psilocybin is an FDA-approved medication, and it costs $24,000 out of pocket. Okay, so when people say this is not going to be as affordable as if it was an FDA-approved treatment, it's probably going to be more affordable than whatever psilocybin costs out the gate once it gets FDA approval in 3 years in the best case scenario for a lot of people, and more accessible for a lot of people. And then the other thing is that if you have to travel abroad right now to access this legally, almost certainly the care we offer in Massachusetts is going to be cheaper than that. And I said I was going to say two things, but I'll add one more thing here. I know a lot of people who are into psychedelics and understand the science and the public health data. They see they're really safe and they go, what's the point of all this regulation? What's the point of all these safeguards? As somebody who understands that, I think it's also important to note that for individuals, the high doses, they do come with real risks. And one of the biggest risks is that people become very vulnerable. And a lot of people just don't have the privilege of having a safe space in their home or in their community to access these substances. And people with serious mental health issues, it's a big gamble for them to roll the dice going to the underground. It's really, really important for people to have a place to access these therapeutically, especially at the high doses that show the most utility in clinical trials. It's important for them to be able to access those in a place they can feel safe and secure. And a lot of people, the reality is they just don't have that, and they can't access that in the underground. Me and Jamie both know people we think would benefit from high-dose experiences, and we're not comfortable trip sitting for them. It's a big responsibility. and we're not comfortable necessarily sending these people to the underground. So there's a real valid use case for this, even though these things are pretty safe, and even though people should not be criminalized for using them, clearly, there is a real need for regulated access, and it is going to be useful for people in the real world, in addition to everything else.
Yeah, agreed. So we're 45 minutes in, and I realized, Graham, that we didn't really get into your story at all. Like, how did you become interested in this whole psychedelic space?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Joe. I'm happy to go into that. So I struggled with obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, for basically the entirety of my adult life. It became really, really severe when I was 19, leading to me to leave college temporarily on a medical leave. During that time, that by itself would have been pivotal, but I ended up developing this very pivotal friendship during that time. I met another young college student who had taken a medical leave for severe mental illness. She had depression. She became my best friend in the entire world. And I didn't really understand severe depression before that. And I was stabilized on my conventional med at the time, Lexapro. So I just didn't really understand. I had this very naive view of how treatable serious mental illness was because of my relatively positive experience with Lexapro. But a few months after I met this wonderful person, her depression became very, very severe. And me and my family were taking care of her because her family was out of state. And it was just this complete nightmare, like I couldn't imagine. I mean, her depression was so bad she had trouble moving, and she had like become a zombie. She was this brilliant person going to one of the best universities in the world, and all of a sudden she's talking in loops, and she's sort of in, it's like a soul pain. I just had no idea what severe depression looked like. And she wasn't medicated, and we went to the hospital together, and her suicidality was determined to be so severe that she was involuntarily hospitalized. That was a really traumatic experience for her. The treatment she got was basically nothing. They discharged her with Lexapro, which is a very slow-acting medication for many people, and even has this risk of increasing suicidality, like many psychiatric meds do have this risk. And she died less than 2 months later. And my mom, she missed a flight. Her family asked us to check on her. This was a week after me and her had celebrated my 21st birthday together. And my mom went up and found her dead. And she came out. I was in the car, and it was horrible. It was a horrible thing that really stuck with me. And for many years, I just wanted to move past it and not think about it. It sort of seemed hopeless. In my own situation, I was very resigned to it. So when I say the meds worked, they kind of worked, but Lexapro kind of also turned me into a little bit of a zombie. I gained all this weight. In fact, I got off of Lexapro because a family member sort of said, "You're not living your best life. I think maybe you should get off the meds and see if your OCD is still bad." It was still bad, and long story short, I ended up turning to psilocybin as kind of a last resort. And my family pulled an intervention, and they said, "Here are your choices. You can either do an intensive inpatient program for your OCD, or you can go back on a conventional medication with the side effects you don't like, but hey, you can't be living the way you're living, or you can try this psilocybin stuff, which your brother's been researching." So I did the psilocybin. It was amazing, life-changing, and in my personal experience, with all of the limits to that, what seemed curative or really healing, not just reducing the symptoms, but really leading to enduring, seemingly permanent improvements in my mental health and functioning, and making me even more care about the politics of this and changing the policy. I was in a OCD support group before and after the psilocybin, and everybody, it seemed like, was medicated, and everybody week after week wasn't getting better. We were all struggling together. And then all of a sudden I started using the psilocybin in earnest, and I'm flying ahead all of a sudden. No, that thing that seemed to be impossible that I did one time and told you guys all about, that's easy now. It was ridiculous. It felt wrong. I felt like I was cheating, in one night using a very small dose of psilocybin, I ended up getting this 90% reduction in my symptoms. And I woke up the next day and it was like going from a wheelchair to being able to walk. I mean, I hadn't been able to touch my walls without having to wash my hands. I hadn't been able to touch my light switches, and all of a sudden I could touch everything, and it was this incredible experience, and go outside and touch the sidewalk. And in addition to all that joy of being healed, there was this, oh my God, there's all these people, I know them, trapped in this hell, and I can't even tell them about this without putting them in legal jeopardy. And after a few months, I finally worked up the courage, this was all the way back in 2021, to share with them what had happened. And what ended up happening is my post was deleted, and the moderator of the group was like, because of liability issues, you can't post about that. You can't talk about this, or we might have to kick you out. And that was so disheartening. Similarly, I tried to share my experience on an OCD Reddit group, and it was similarly deleted, I think because it was not enough research. It was really, really frustrating. It turned me off of advocacy for 2 years just because it was disheartening. And then when this ballot measure came to town last year, when I started hearing about it, I was like, okay, this is the time where I really have to stand up. or else, when will be the time? So that's how I decided to get into it. And I guess the last thing I'll add is that unfortunately that experience caring for the loved one who died by suicide, that wasn't the last time that I went through something like that. I'll be a little bit fuzzy on the timeline so this person doesn't get identified, but in the last few years I had another person I was very close to who became severely suicidally depressed. And I had to navigate the system again, including a hospitalization again, and the total nightmare of how difficult it is to get care, and the feeling of helplessness, nothing's working and nobody knows what will work. It was a complete nightmare. Fortunately, they did okay, and they're still alive. But we desperately need more options to be legal. We certainly don't need to be prosecuting people for trying to heal. And I really, really believe in this.
Thank you for that. Thanks for sharing. It's hard. A lot of us have similar stories, right? We can relate to. So putting it out there really helps make it relatable. And Massachusetts has been also hit really hard with the fentanyl crisis, opioid crisis, and these substances look like they can help us quite a bit treat those addictions. And I think that's another reason why it's a good idea to bring these forward. The contemporary treatment options for around addiction are not all that amazing, right?
Yeah, thank you again, Joe, for bringing this on, and I'd love to just to elaborate a little bit on that. It's through this work that I learned that the leading cause of preventable death in Massachusetts is still tobacco. That may surprise a lot of people. It surprised me, but it is the leading preventable cause of death in Massachusetts, killing over 9,000 people a year still. And even though the clinical evidence is very preliminary that psilocybin can help, the results in the single open-label study of psilocybin for tobacco cessation were just astounding in terms of how many people quit. And over the course of my activism in the last year, I've met 2 people who quit smoking using psilocybin. And again, so it's anecdotal, but I really believe in this. And I think there's certainly enough evidence that this is worth providing as an option to people, considering the scale of the crisis. And yes, we've also had a huge opioid crisis in Massachusetts, over 2,000 people dying every year from opioid overdoses, including this most recent year, even though it's gone down. And ibogaine is already a prescription medication used off-label to treat opioid addiction in New Zealand. And it has been for over a decade. So real-world settings, people are seeing effectiveness for these substances to help people with life-threatening or debilitating conditions. Truly life-threatening, truly debilitating, as we see with hundreds of suicides and thousands of fatal overdoses. So to me and Jamie and the rest of us here, it's just a total no-brainer that we should make these substances available for people to use therapeutically without the fear of prosecution, and ideally in a safe and regulated environment.
Mm-hmm. Jamie, do you want to add anything from your perspective about the regulated aspects? Like, a lot of people in the veteran world are very happy to go in an unregulated direction, but like from your perspectives, like why is it important to have regulated supply and
I
services?
definitely think it's a good option, like Graham said, for people who might have, higher levels of trauma or might have certain, mental health issues or, things that might need a little more support. I definitely, before I went on my psilocybin trauma retreat down in Mexico, was less, I didn't see the need for the regulated model as much as I do now, just because it was such intense trauma that many of these women were dealing with. And all I could think of was a facilitator who's not really, really skilled and doesn't really, really understand, trauma and all of these issues that might come up for people. It would be a disservice to them. It's like anything, right? It kind of depends on who you get and who's helping you. And if you get the wrong person and there's no recourse, I could just see how that could make things a lot worse for some people. So it's not the substances themselves that are, potentially harmful, but it's who are you putting yourself in the hands of? And, not to bring it back to Bay Staters, but just quickly, that experience and what I saw, there are just some people who should not be facilitating for others. There needs to be some regulation and some protection for people who are entrusting their, fragile psyches to someone else. So I, and even for my own son, who's, he's 21, but he has had severe OCD like Graham. Actually, Graham and I connected because that was initially what really piqued my interest in hearing him talk when we met on a Bay Staters call, was his experience in treating really severe OCD. So, my son has had a lot of medical trauma over the years. It's just he's not a straightforward case. And for him, I would want someone really skilled and trained to TRIPS it for him. And same with my husband, who has, decades of trauma. It's not just service related, but he has a lot of, childhood trauma. And I just think for some people, clearly there's a range, right? Some people are fine doing this on their own or with this, the support of a friend, a facilitator. There's some great underground facilitators out there who absolutely know what they're doing and are trustworthy for sure. But I think the regulated model is going to work for a lot of people. I think that's what a lot of people are going to want, because it's sort of in line with our Western thinking of, you go to a place, the doctor fixes you and makes you better. So I think some people are going to want that. But it's nice to have options for everyone. And I will just add, I did not have a lot of appreciation for the indigenous use aspect of this before. In theory, I got it, but I really got it when I went on this trauma retreat, which was a traditional indigenous-led ceremony with native healers and, an amazing woman who was raised by her grandparents who were traditional healers in Chile, and then came to the States and worked for the Department of Defense with soldiers with severe traumatic brain injuries and PTSD. And she has her PhD in mind-body medicine. But it was a traditional ceremony. So it was really the best of both worlds. And that group healing aspect, that sort of community healing versus, you're a broken person and here, go take this medicine and figure out, how to fix yourself with maybe one other person supporting you for once a week. I just feel like that community-based group healing model was so powerful and definitely something I would love to see more widely available in Massachusetts. I think it economically makes sense. It would help to drive costs down, but I think it's just a super important piece of healing that we're missing, and that adds so much, and especially in this post-COVID world of disconnection. So there's just a lot of power in healing and community.
Just to expand off of that a little bit, I think a lot of the value in regulation is that people get what they expect to get. If somebody says that they're practicing in an indigenous lineage, are they just saying that, or do they actually have the credentials? Did they actually do the work? Is there anybody keeping track of who is who they say they are and who isn't? I think that's a lot of the value of the regulated use model in addition to everything else. It's just people deserve as consumers to know what they're getting, and the only way to make that a thing is with regulation. People are already using these substances. We think this measure is going to make that use more safe by making it easier for people to be honest with their healthcare providers and their loved ones about their interest in this topic, to report experiences honestly and transparently, both positive and negative, and also to create an above ground model of responsible use that I think will encourage people interested in this to act more responsibly than they otherwise would. I think an important thing to mention is that this really doesn't change the game that much for recreational users, because none of these substances really are going to show up on blood tests, because the existing restrictions on the personal use of these substances are kind of so weak already. Like a lot of your people listening are probably already aware of this, but people are always shocked. Psilocybin mushroom spores are already federally legal. They can be shipped to your door in Massachusetts. Illegal to grow them, but legal to get the spores to your house. Mescaline containing San Pedro cacti, totally legal to grow and possess and sell without restriction as long as you're not going to eat it. Can't eat it, but legal to have in your house. DMT containing Mimosa hostilis, again, federally legal already, can get it shipped to your house. So these things are already not that, cracked down upon, but if you're trying to use this medically or therapeutically, it's really, really important for you to be able to talk about it with your healthcare providers, to not feel ashamed or frightened of coming forward if you're harmed, or asking people about what you're considering doing if you're interested in it. So this is really going to make the biggest difference and the biggest change in terms of access for people who really, really, really need it. People have a lot of thoughts on other kinds of personal use, some in favor, some not. But the real focus of this is on the people who need it most for healing.
I want to do a couple rapid fire questions, if we could. They're serious, they're not jokes, but just, as we're a bit short on time. Mescaline, is peyote included?
No, it's not, because of the request of certain indigenous people.
What kind of conversations, briefly, have you had with some of the Massachusetts-based indigenous groups?
I have not personally had any conversations. Jamie, have you?
No. We've tried.
Right on. Cool. Yeah, it's not like peyote's from Massachusetts, so I get it. And data collection. In some places, there's mandatory data collection. I think Colorado might still have that. Oregon definitely, I think, still does too, where you cannot opt out. And this isn't like, you can strive for HIPAA protection, but it's not really HIPAA protected because it's outside of the medical, clinical, federal frame. But where does this Massachusetts bill fall on data collection?
This Massachusetts bill, I believe, has data collection built in, but I got to be fully transparent. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I do know it has data collection built in, and that was seen as an improvement over Oregon. I'll also say personally, and I could go more into the weeds of it and learn more about it. But personally, I'm in favor of data collection. Like, we have some preliminary safety data.
Like mandatory and no opt-out kind of deals?
Not no opt-out, but I do think having it be opt-out rather than opt-in, because we have this incredible safety data from Oregon that's preliminary, and I'd love to have efficacy data. I think it would show these things are not only safe, as the preliminary data says, or suggests, I should say, but I think that it would strongly suggest they're very effective as well. Unfortunately, we don't have that data. Sure, some people are going to disagree with me, but I would like to have the data to inform policy, and to keep, to help move this along. But I will admit this is going out of my area of expertise. And we can follow up and try to get you more information on the data collection aspect in detail.
Please do. The biggest issues there for me are around parents and federal employees. So think of like a really ill CIA person, DOD person that needs help but doesn't want to get exposed because they'll lose their whole career, like that kind of thing. Fighter pilots, deals like that. Go ahead, Jamie.
I 1,000% agree with that, because my husband worked for the federal government for many years, and was afraid even to get his cannabis license. So I think that's a real fear. I think data collection is important for sure. My background is in survey research and data for the past 25 years. And so I get data can be super helpful in informing policy and all sorts of things, but I think it should be freely given and not mandatory.
Right. I like the default. You're opted in until you opt out. I think that's fine. But forcing people to say, hey, it's either this stuff can get subpoenaed, you can get outed, and or that whole ball of wax. Anyway,
I'm not aware of anything.
Well, let's follow up. Let's follow up, Joe.
Yeah. Great. Microdosing and disability stuff. So in Oregon and Colorado, there's been some challenges around accommodating people with disabilities, and also the practicality around microdosing services. So say, for example, somebody wants to microdose, they would have to go to a healing center, consume the microdose, stay for X amount of time, and then go home, potentially not even driving themselves, and potentially doing that 5 times a week, like anywhere 1 to 5 times a week. Not financially practical, and kind of depending on the disability, it could be like a violation of ADA in some ways. And similarly, say, look at end of life care, or so this is going to be kind of hard from the 3-pointer. So microdosing. Then there's the potential ADA lawsuits. So say I'm super disabled and I can't really leave my house at all. Can I contract to get people there? And then there's route of administration. So oral only in naturally sourced in Oregon. I think we can do isolates in Colorado, but I think it's, again, oral only administration, which for people with esophageal cancer, stomach cancers, things like that, does not really work. And then there's some people who just have very reactive guts, and this therapy is going to be not really great for them if they can't keep the stuff in their stomach, So let's start with microdosing. Any thoughts around that?
So microdosing under this measure, because of the requirement by law for the 3 appointments, is not going to be a thing through the regulated use model. I mean, that's the most straightforward, clear answer. Now the at-home use under facilitation, I believe the regulatory body is empowered in this measure to create rules to allow a licensed facilitator to administer the substances at home. I could be wrong, but my understanding is intentionally learning from the lessons of Oregon that there was provided that flexibility so the regulatory body can allow licensed facilitators to administer the substances in people's homes as part of the regulated use model. It's not mandated that be allowed, but I believe intentionally it was written so that could happen under this model. In terms of routes of administration, I'm pretty sure similarly it's going to be up to the discretion of the regulatory body. Same thing with the isolates and the manufacturing. There's a licensing system for people who cultivate and presumably who manufacture. So I think that's all TBD, except for microdosing. The 3 appointment model just doesn't allow that to be feasible.
Right on. Right on. I just keep an eye on that route of administration one, just knowing that people can get excluded. And thank you for that. And in terms of like financing, how have y'all kind of financed your campaign? Is it like purely grassroots? Has there been like some engagement with like New Approach or HAF or anything like that?
So I don't want to. I mean, first of all, this is all public. I mean, we have to file these campaign finance reports. It's large donors. I mean, that's been pretty much all of it. Large donors. That's the most straightforward answer. Including indirectly through New Approach, but yeah, it's large donors, not grassroots fundraising. Which is somebody who, by the way, has been involved. This is my second campaign. I wasn't. This is the first campaign I'm staff, but I was a volunteer for the transgender rights ballot measure in 2018. At that time, I was yes on 3. Grassroots fundraising was an integral part of that. But I will say it's also one of the least pleasant parts, where every single time you hold an event, you have to ask everybody to give, and you're knocking on doors asking people to give all the time. It's been nice with this campaign to not have to be asking people for money all the time, and for that not to be part of my job. So, grassroots fundraising is great. We're not really doing it, and we're very grateful to the people who have donated, but it comes with some advantages too.
Yeah, right on. Cool. I think that's it for now. Is there anything we wanted to hit beyond that we didn't really touch on yet?
No.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for your time and hard work here. I really hope to see Massachusetts cross the finish line here on November 5. I'll be watching closely. I would love it in part because I have a lot of friends and family back there, and it'd be lovely to be back in Massachusetts a little more often. So thank you for helping the mental health of Massachusetts. And like, I think you both know it goes beyond mental health. There's like a lot of physical things. There's a whole pain topic. Actually, that's a great one. Have you been in touch with any of the Cluster Busters or Psychedelics Pain Association groups out there?
Yeah. Cluster Busters.
Great.
And yeah, I have an aunt or an aunt, sorry. I'm from I'm from Mississippi originally. So I say aunt, but yeah, I have an aunt who is debilitated. She has horrific chronic migraines that she's had her entire life. She's now well into her 70s and is a total recluse. It's completely ruined her life. And I know that, psilocybin could help her. So yeah, there's a lot of physical, we do focus on the mental health aspects, but there are many, many physical conditions that this can help with as well, including Lyme disease, which I care about personally because of my kids, people who have post-COVID, long COVID symptoms, chronic fatigue. There's a laundry list of physical things that these medicines can help with as well.
Lyme's one of the big reasons I don't visit more.
Yeah.
Honestly.
And now we've got, West Nile virus too to make you feel even more welcome.
Lovely. Can't wait. It's going to be an exciting one. And I work with a lot of the Cluster Busters people in my work with the Psychedelics and Pain Association, who was able to get pain language included in the curriculum for facilitators, which was really great. So we've already built out a lot of that free pain education. So I'm really excited to have that included.
Sorry. I'm realizing there's something else to be said, Joe, which is that me and Jamie are sticking around once this passes. We're we were here before this measure. We cared about this before. We were volunteer advocates before we joined this campaign. And we're going to stick around once it's done to try to make sure it's implemented as well as possible. So I tell people, including this group of people I talked to recently who weren't so supportive of this, I said, look, you may not vote for this. It may not pass. If it does pass, I want you to know that I'm going to be a partner here to help this be done responsibly. A lot of whether this is going to work out is going to be the culture encouraging responsible use, the culture making this work the right way it's going to be. So me and Jamie are here to be partners with anybody from in or outside of the state who wants to make this work, if and when it passes, to have it work well. So anybody listening to this who's like, oh, I have all these thoughts and I want to do this or that if it passes, or like, reach out to me and Jamie, or reach out to other people too. Reach out to whoever you want to, but just know that as individuals, me and Jamie care about seeing this all the way through. And yeah, we're not just here to get this over and then ride off into the sunset. Like, we're excited for what's going to come next. We have a lot of ideas. We're not talking about them all the time because it's sort of irrelevant until this passes. But yeah, we're really into this, and we're going to be around to work with people to make this work.
Yeah, and the affordability piece is super important to me personally. That is my mission in life after November 5th, is to try to find a way, to get this into the hands of people who really need it, and not just the rich. I've had a horrible experience with my own family, and trying to afford care. And yeah, that piece of it is super important to me. I've also been really lucky to get, most of my mental health through a nonprofit, Heroic Hearts, and also a local nonprofit that does a lot of good in my community. And my dream for after this is some sort of nonprofit work where I can give back and make sure that this medicine helps the people it needs to help, right? Because if it's legal and you can't afford it, that's almost worse.
I've been angling for years and years now about how to make it really affordable. So Jamie, reach out after we win, and I'll share everything I can.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both, Jamie and Graham. Yes, on question 4, and let's bring it over the finish line. Thank you both.
So much, Joe. Thank you for having us on.
Take care.